here are some things to consider as we move into the second half, this very complicated decade. A time of transition of norms into a new state of affairs. A sort of epochal, generational change. And I acknowledge that all generations think they are maybe at some pivot point. The tradition of apocalypses being imminent goes back thousands of years, and it's part of our history. And that's ties into my main point I want to make here, is that part of our history. One thing that we have been told is this myth of linear progress, that we're always progressing upwards. But a more interesting reality is that base fundamental human nature has never changed. It literally can't. Let's do the math. Here's the reality. As smart as we are, that's just a little plug-in, add-in on top, the upper brain of a substrate of physical evolution that has been going on for millions of years. And the fact is that human beings are fundamentally based on the evolutionary architecture of the great ape, who are hierarchical, patriarchal, relatively small band social primates. That has profound implications. If you're religious, you believe that God has been involved in how we came out of this underlying substrate. But whatever your belief around that, the implication of the fact that we're built on the architecture is that we need to accommodate for that and put guardrails around our own limitations and biases. The fact of the matter is, we are relatively comfortable with and highly susceptible to the foxes running the henhouse in society. And that is, in fact, what we've seen more or less throughout modern human history, the rise of large cities. It's hierarchical from very early on in a lot of places. And the exceptions are really fantastic and need more study. But the fact of the matter is, we default quite often to letting the strongman archetype run things. I think, my theory is that however many thousands of years of sitting around thinking about philosophy, or thousands of years of a certain religious influence, or hundreds of years of certain social attitudes, that's a blip of time compared to the millions of years of how hardwired the instinct is, the default is, to allow the alpha male to sort of run things and to allow the alpha females to run these things. And the rest of us fall into these, dogs do it, wolves do it. We call it the pecking order for a reason. Chickens do it. Birds. The cats in my living space have a hierarchy. So I just point that out to say that some of the things that we find that we suffer, that we wake up to, we realize we have these biases and these illusions, and we project things, and we don't really listen to each other, and we live in bubbles and all this stuff. All of that can be understood in the light of the limitations of our physical biology, our physical substrate. And however enlightened or however much soul or God or spirit you have in you, I think we are limited by the meat suit, if you will. As we know, I had a son who suffered traumatic brain injury. If your physical structure is compromised, the spirit cannot express itself in a full and complete way. Well, maybe it can, full and complete, but in a different way, in a physical or verbal expressive way. So that gives rise to my thought that the limitations of the body filter the ability of whatever consciousness is coming through. It just filters that ability to manifest. So certain physical injuries and limitations lead to mental and potentially spiritual limitations. We are by default highly likely to live in an illusion, a bubble of illusion. Our brains are not evolved to show us reality. They are evolved to help us survive in reality. And sometimes tuning things out, and in our case, that is how it works, tuning things out. It's a filter, because we don't have enough room in our brains to run the processing, to look at, to parallel process all the stimuli coming from our environment. We don't have the time. There could be compromises to made, bigger brains take up so much calories, we can't feed them, right? There's all kinds of these limits. Everything is a balance of compromises. There are no binary, false binary, it's not binary. It's sliding spectral inner working networks, right? So increasing one thing decreases another. So we are limited by our bodies in so many ways. Our capacities are. We're simply not capable of achieving certain levels. Now, we know when we talk about, we make films about and write novels about humans who have, the Shaolin monks or autistic savants or whatever. We always talk about the extremes and think, wow, there are exceptions, but there are still limits. And this may be why things like AI and other things are beginning to manifest now, that Pluto is in Aquarius, is that's the next step of evolution, possibly. Don't know. But in the meantime, we're getting our news, we're getting our information, we're getting our belief structure, we're getting our ideas about the world through multiple filters. The final one of which is ourselves. The fact that we project certain biases onto evidence, which makes us completely blind to certain evidence and over-focused on others, and therefore confirm biases and reinforce. And now we have the tools through the internet to do that in an exponentially more impactful way, with repercussions that now everyone is beginning to talk about. So where to conclude this rambling rant, as we enter a news cycle where it is literally impossible to fully know the truth of things are, and the understanding that our own biology and the physical structures of our brain make it genuinely difficult to know what's true, a healthy doubt and an open skepticism is probably a good plan with respects to everything, right? Especially our comfort zones. Just an open, if you feel the ouch of encountering an idea that really challenges you, acknowledge the ouch, but don't reject the idea. Put it in a back closet until you have the emotional and mental space to go examine it. Or at least allow for the possibility that even though you don't have time to examine it, some people believe these things over here, and I don't even look at that. But acknowledge that your fellow humans think other things than you do. And some of that difference has profound implications. Like we have, especially in the West, fallen into this bubbleized notion that the whole world, all 8 billion people, want a kind of modern neoliberal late-stage capitalist society. Well, guess what? The vast majority of people on this earth do not actually want that. Actually don't, right? And no amount of coercion and social influencing through media and financial manipulations will actually change that, right? Because human nature, based on the primate substrate, is ingrained, And cultural and social evolution has gone in different directions in different parts of the world, and we are genuinely different in our underlying values in different places. And no one place has the right to declare by fiat that their version of what is morally right, politically desirable, or more the possibly existential decisions that we make for ourselves, because we are now at the point of having godlike technology and fundamentally primate emotional intelligence. So that's what I would say about guardrails. Just the acknowledgement of our own weakness and limitations as a species should make us more cautious at multiple levels. So caution, including in your doubt and fear and anxiety and skepticism. Be cautious about too much of that, right? Because things may turn out great if we visualize that and start working on the hard problems. I am as cynical as I am, and as consciously aware as I am of how many genuine dangers to the human race there are before us. I am fundamentally an optimist, possibly because I have children and younger friends. They have to inherit a world that's survivable. I hope to have grandchildren, and they have to inherit a world that's survivable. But it doesn't feel like the current generation and the current structures will incentivize that outcome. So change needs to happen. So the problem is, if it happens too violently, it can break the whole. So it has to change gradually enough to lead to something to come after. But in the meantime, there's going to be a war of narratives this year. And I just think it behooves us to be more agnostic more often than we have tended to be for 2026. You don't need to be absolutely certain of every idea out there. Yeah? It's a kind of wait and see vibe. And do the best you can and help each other. And also focus more on your local situation, because that's what's going to impact us all the most. Yeah? I don't know. I'm more or less hopeful going into this year. I think it's going to be rock'em sock'em. A lot of geopolitical maneuvering already happening. Venezuela has fallen, I've just heard. So anyway, what a world. But our biases are based on our biology, and they are many. And so even what we think we have perceived should be in doubt. I intended that to be a hopeful ending, and I think it sounded like a bummer. Anyway, that's my message. 13-minute rant. Thank you for listening. Be well, my friends.